Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And I'm here today to refresh my 5 ways to save series that Patrick and I had worked on several years ago. And I believe we initially had 10 or 11 videos in the series. A couple of them were some random ideas that we compiled from subscribers. Most of them are focusing on specific areas. Like one of them, for example, was 5 ways that having food storage saves, and then other ones would be like 5 ways to save on water, 5 ways to save on electricity, and more. Well, today it's going to be about 5 ways to save money in the kitchen. So this is going to be a little bit of a reboot of the one I did on 5 ways to save on groceries, but some of these points are coming from a slightly different angle, and I'm adding a couple new points to that. So obviously, shopping around for the best prices and then buying items in bulk. Like a lot of people, you can find they can get some good deals on Costco on various things buying in bulk, but Costco doesn't always have everything we're looking for. Like you might not be able to get the whole organic grains that you want to use in making your breads or pancakes or whatever. So personally for me, when I'm buying organic grains, I'm buying from Azure Standard most of the time, but I always keep track of the current price and including the cost of shipping. And so I add that into the total per pound. And I did explain this in the video I did on where I buy my grains, which I'll link to down below for more information. But for example, for a while I was getting my white wheat berries from Amazon through the Palouse brand, which is a really good brand that I recommend, and it's also grown here in Washington State, so it makes it a great option. But when that brand shot up in price on Amazon, and I went back to Azure Standard and compared the price there, adding in, even though over here I get free shipping, on Azure Standard, I personally have to pay shipping to get it shipped to my door. So I added in the cost of shipping to the total, then divided that by the pound and found that I could pay less per pound buying it on Azure Standard than I could on Amazon with the free shipping. So make sure you're looking at all of those details. Sometimes people will look at something and go, oh, but the shipping's this and that, but don't consider the total cost. So they may end up paying more for something that's labeled as having free shipping when most likely what's happened is shipping was already figured into the total cost. And then they write it off as free shipping. So make sure you're doing your math on that. And of course, when it comes to buying in bulk, you want to look at buying the things you know that you use most and have those put away in your food storage. So one of the ways this also saves money by buying in bulk is not just that you're usually paying less per pound or per ounce for various things, but you're saving yourself that many trips to the store. And so that's going to save you time, and that's going to save you fuel by having this stuff put away in your pantry. And then plus, you got the food there for a rainy day. And certainly don't stock up on foods in bulk that you don't use or you only use rarely. The amount you stock up on and buy in bulk is going to vary depending on what you use the most. And that's the way it should go. Don't just start buying a bunch of black pepper if it's something you rarely use. And then, of course, another obvious one would be learning to cook and bake from scratch. Now, most of us already know this, but a lot of times people don't think about certain other details when it comes to making stuff from scratch. And I've noticed this, especially in our younger generations, is that since home ec, for the most part, has been done away with in the public school system, a lot of people think that cooking from scratch means buying a box of Jiffy cornbread or a box of cake mix or a box of pancake mix, and thinking that's, because they're actually mixing it up themselves, adding the water and the egg, that now they're baking from scratch. Well, that's not what I personally consider cooking from scratch. So what's happening is you're actually paying more for this mix than what you could pay for, let's say if you do make a lot of cornbread, well, stock up on cornmeal or even whole corn that you can grind yourself, because whole corn is going to store for a longer period of time than already ground corn, and then grind up a bunch of cornmeal as you need it. So white cornmeal is something that we tend to use quite often, and so I buy the whole white corn, organic, non-GMO from Azure Standard, and then periodically we'll grind up a bunch of it. So I have a jar that I keep it in, and when that jar gets close to empty, then I'll grind up a bunch more. Anyway, making the cornbread from scratch with the cornmeal and the fat, the egg, and the buttermilk if you use that, or regular milk, or just plain water, and the baking powder that maybe you make yourself. This is going to save you a lot more money than stocking up on a bunch of boxes of Jiffy cornbread. So learn how to do those things from scratch as well. And here's another tip I want to throw out there. When it comes to making your own, maybe you want to mix up your own quote unquote Bisquick mix or Jiffy cornbread mix. Maybe, yes, you'll save money by mixing that up yourself and then having it on hand. But I would not do that in bulk. That's not something I would do a bunch of at once, because here's one of the issues you're looking at is anything that's going to have baking powder in it. Well, over time, as that sits, that baking powder is going to lose its effectiveness once it's mixed together, which is why, like I talked about in the video I did on making your own baking powder, I just keep the two main ingredients, the two active ingredients, separate. So I don't have to add any kind of starch to it, be it cornstarch, tapioca starch, arrowroot starch. I just keep them separate. It doesn't take but another second or two to take a little from each jar rather than taking some from just one jar. And this way I know keeping them separate means they're going to stay good for years, probably indefinitely. But once they're mixed together, you got to work through it. So it's not just about it possibly clumping. It's about the fact that baking powder loses its effectiveness over time. So once they've been mixed together, and that same applies to your mixes. So making a pre-mix isn't necessarily going to be the cost-effective way to go. It only takes a few minutes to mix up a pancake batter, a cornbread batter, and a cake mix, and so on. I think the main thing is just getting in the habit of doing it, because the more you do something, the faster you'll get at it. You don't have to pull out a recipe book all the time because you already have the ratios in your head. And I almost never use a recipe book. Whenever I make breads of any kind, I don't use a recipe book because I know what goes in it. I know the ratios I need. And plus, especially with something like pancakes, I do something different with them every single time. Maybe I'll add some dried apple powder that I made up from the apples from our tree, or some pumpkin powder like I made up from the pumpkins that we grow, and maybe some spices for flavoring, whatever. I mean, it can change. Sometimes it's a banana. If I got some bananas on hand, mash it up and throw it in there, or blueberries from the bushes out there in the summertime. So it's, that way you can also tailor it as you're making it to suit you. Okay, so point number 3 is then learn how to stretch the things you have, especially when we're talking about meats, because meats are typically the most expensive part of any meal. But it doesn't have to be the main dish. We often think, though we need those animal proteins, and most of us do anyway, it doesn't mean we have to have meat be the main dish. We don't have to have a steak and potato and a side vegetable every single night. And in fact, steaks are something we do, but rarely. And even then, leftovers get cut up and used in something else. So an example would be, let's say you're going to go ahead and cook up some steaks as a special treat. Well, maybe you have a bunch of steak. I suggest barbecue it all at once. You're going to save yourself time and money later. Then you take your extras, slice it into pieces, and you can make steak fajitas out of that another night. Same thing applies to any kind of, whether it be a turkey, a whole chicken, a roast, maybe you're doing a salmon or steelhead fillet, you eat on that one night, then you can take the rest of that meat and turn it into several other meals. So what I did years ago was I put together making the most of leftovers, and it was all focused on meat dishes, then how you can take the leftover meat, make at least one other dish out of that, or 2 or even 3 or 4 more different dishes throughout the week using that one roast fillet or whatever it was that you made, and you can really stretch that out. So anyway, I do recommend you check out that full playlist I'll be putting down below, where I give a whole bunch of different ideas and recipes on things that you can do with the leftovers to really stretch it out and get the most out of that. Okay, and then point number 4 is going to be about, and this is one of those that's definitely going to be a different one. I have videos where I talk about making your own homemade mayonnaise, your own homemade powdered sugar, or brown sugar and some of those things like that, which I do and I will still do. However, each person's going to have to decide, and that's just a few examples. Is the amount of money you save doing it yourself, is it worth the time expended in doing it yourself? Maybe you go ahead and stock up on the brown sugar and the powdered sugar so you don't have to make it, and then the time you save having to make that every time you need it can be better spent in doing other things from scratch that might save you more money. So it's about balance. Now, one of the reasons why I make mayonnaise, powdered sugar, and brown sugar from on my own is those things really don't take that much time, for one, but also because for me, it's about knowing what exactly is in there, making sure that the ingredients I have are non-GMO, organic, and don't have a bunch of additives. And finding a good quality organic brown sugar is not always easy to find. Same goes with powdered sugar without paying a lot of money. Now, Costco, I keep seeing it on Costco, but I cannot get it here, the brown sugar. Otherwise, I would buy that. Because to me, mixing up the molasses into the sugar is a bit time consuming. It doesn't take that long, but it's kind of a pain. But I still do that. So again, it's just about finding what's important to you. And maybe, by the way, too, because of where you live, you have stores near you that you can find those things at a good price, a lot better than I can find, or maybe somebody else can find that makes their thing from scratch. And for you, it's going to be worth it to buy that like already made up, and maybe you're saving just as much money because of the price that you're getting wherever you're at. Because just in the United States alone, we have different stores that are available in certain places that aren't available in others. Like over on the east side of the states, especially I think southeast, a lot of people talk about Aldi's. I've never seen an Aldi's, and I don't know that I ever will. And over on our side, there's a lot of Whole Foods, but I've only seen one, and it's not anywhere near us. So we don't have access to those things. So a lot of the stuff that we get either has to be local or what we can find online, which oftentimes is not always the best deal. I say all that because don't feel that you have to do everything that I do, or this channel over there does, or that channel over there does. You got to pick and choose what's going to work best for you, because it might not be saving you a lot of money to do this from scratch, especially if it's taking your precious time away from something else that could be more important, especially things like spending time with your kids and grandkids. So it's all about finding that balance and what is going to fit into your lifestyle and your schedule. Never feel guilted into doing something from scratch just because someone else does. But again, the more you can do from scratch, the more money you're going to, typically, the more money you're going to save, though not always. So always do the math on these things. And then that brings me to my final point, which I'm not going to talk about growing your own food, because that's an obvious one, which I covered in that video on saving on groceries. But I do recommend it. But my fifth point is cutting back on throwaway items that you'd use in your kitchen. So I did have a video recently come out about foil-free baking, and I'm talking more about things that you bake. I use cast iron for a lot of things, but when we're talking about things that need a cover, a lid, and you don't have the right lid or whatever, and so people will put foil over something, or they'll put foil over something to carry it, or they'll line stuff with foil. When, for one, foil, though you can wash it and reuse it, it still only has so many uses, and it can get expensive if you're using it a lot. Same thing goes with plastic wrap. And on top of that, both of these things are things that we should be reducing for the sake of our health anyway. And if you're concerned about what's going into the landfill, well, that's less stuff going into the landfill. But really, right at the top would be the frugality. So when it comes to those kind of things, and this includes parchment paper. And by the way, I keep all these things on hand because they can all have their place. But I've really reduced my dependency on all those by finding things that I can constantly reuse over and over and over and over again. I don't have to worry about it wearing out. It's always going to be there. That's going to be more long run savings. So the initial investment for buying a good stainless steel pot like I have here, I ended up with 2 of them. And I love these things. They work great. In fact, I found that This works great even for putting bread in. And because the way the lid fits on there, it actually keeps the bread pretty fresh. But I can make soups in this, I can make casseroles in this, and I've always got a lid. And even if it's something not baked, that doesn't necessarily need a cover when it's being baked, but I want to take it to a friend's house, well, I want to cover it, I can put the lid on it. I don't have to put plastic wrap or foil over it. So that way I'm constantly having something I can reuse. It definitely is an investment on up front, getting some good pots, pans, and more that have some lids that go with it, which by the way, you can also get. I found a lot of my glass or stainless steel lids that I have for my various pots work well with a lot of my cast iron skillets. So if I want to put a lid over something that I'm cooking in cast iron, I just put one of those on there because most of those are round anyway. So anyway, I go in more detail about this and how to be more plastic free and resorting to things that are reusable in a couple of different videos I'll be linking to down below. These are ways that you can save money in your kitchen by cutting back on these things. And yes, that includes parchment paper, such as maybe you like to use parchment paper in your dehydrator racks to keep small things from falling through. Well, you can use what I do for like herbs. I use cloth liners that I make myself out of old cotton sheets. And I also invested in the silicone trays with the edges on them for doing liquid things. So you can learn more about that on the videos. Like I'll put the video down below, which is actually back before I got my Kasori, where I show how I make cloth covers for the Nesco and for my off-grid drying rack. And I'll also link to whichever one, dehydrating related one, where I talk about the silicone trays. I think one of my most recent ones has that in there. So you can look into that, because that one I recommend, because I linked to the cheapest ones I found so far. And a lady did comment and say that those brown ones that had the better price, where you can get more for your money, she said those ones actually cleaned off easier than the green ones that are more expensive. So anyway, check those videos out so you can learn more about saving money. And don't forget to check out the full playlist I'll link to down below on 5 ways to save. That's the name of the playlist. And hopefully I'll be coming up with some more of these so I can keep this series going, because it kind of got forgotten about, but I'd like to do some more of these videos because they are fun. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any other ideas on ways you can save in the kitchen, go ahead and put those down below, and maybe that'll be a video for a future 5 ways to save. All right, well, thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.